Uhuru, and welcome to episode 3 of the One Africa Worldview podcast. My name is Soliana Bakel. I am the managing editor of the Burning Spear newspaper, the official organ of the African People's Socialist Party.
Uhuru Sasa, I'm Jaina Lumumba. I'm inviting you to join the African People's Socialist Party, of which I'm the Southern Regional Representative.
Uhuru comrades, I'm Dr. Mariah, promotions manager and volunteer at Black Power 96 Radio, bringing the voice of our community to the panel and helping to amplify the ongoing resistance of the African working class.
And Uhuru comrades, I'm Akilia Anai, the Director of Media and Communications for the African People's Socialist Party. And just want to say Uhuru to my co-hosts. Looking good, Uhuru. We just celebrated African Liberation Day and the anniversary of the party's founding right here in the Southern region, I know in the Africa region and the West Coast. So, we're just exuberating the energy of African Liberation Day. So, Uhuru.
Yes, that is right. Don't also forget the Northern region, which we
Yes.
celebrated our ALD a little bit earlier than the rest of the regions, but we did it in Philly. Just putting that out there. We had a great time as well. But yes, we are back with another episode of One Africa Worldview, the weekly news podcast of Burning Spear Media, airing on Burning Spear TV YouTube and Burning Spear Media Rumble channels, bringing you news and analysis that you just won't find anywhere else. This is through the African Internationalist perspective that sees the world through the eyes of the African working class and understands that the unity and organization of the dispersed African nation is what will resolve the everyday oppressions caused by the colonial mode of production. This is the world economic system that functions and prospers on the backs of African people and all colonized people's labor. So with that, please hit that like button and help us to overcome the shadow banning that revolutionary African voices face. Share this show with your friends and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We have about 13,000 subscribers so far, so please help us get to 15,000 this month. We start with our Whirlwind Weekly update discussing the top news headlines of the week, then head into our primary objective, the main topic of our show. Last week, we reported that on Friday, May 16, a tornado swept through St. Louis, Missouri, devastating the Northside African community. Homes and personal properties were destroyed. Uhuru Movement projects and members' personal homes were also severely impacted, and lives were lost. The heaviest impact is concentrated in the African community, but the city and the media are covering it up because it would expose, in part, that a tornado wasn't needed to destroy and displace Black people from the community. The tornado came in the form of the Team 4 plan, the building of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in the heart of the North Side, and other city-initiated assaults and gentrification plots. The power has yet to be fully restored, and yet the city has enforced a curfew for Africans, set up police command centers on the North Side, and sent cops to forcibly evict Africans from their homes, giving them 10 days to leave, deeming their property condemned. The African People's Socialist Party, through the Black Power Blueprint and other means, has organized a relief response, setting up drop-off sites for food, water, diapers, and other essentials, setting up charging stations for people to charge up their phones, gone out into the community to ensure the safety and well-being of the people, prepared and distributed fresh hot meals, and just so much more. And the community is coming out, and despite these horrible losses, the community is celebrating the unity that is coming with organizing the relief efforts. So in this episode, we expose how historically these so-called, natural disasters always result in total devastation for the African community, and call out the government for its failures, betrayals, and intentions of further pushing out Black people to sell the city to the highest bidder as usual. We also show how African independence, self-determination, and the anti-colonial struggle is where we find our solution. We can and must organize to do it for ourselves. So be sure to stay tuned to learn how you can participate in the efforts to bring emergency relief to Northside St. Louis. But before we get into all of that, let's review some of the news that has happened this past week. Dr. Mariah, what do you have for us first?
Uhuru. In a move steeping clear racial and colonial undertones, Donald Trump sparked international controversy by announcing support for white South African farmers who claim to be victims of land exploration and white genocide. citing alleged violence and discrimination. Trump called for their expedited immigration to the United States, labeling them very fine farmers and suggesting they would thrive in America. At the same time, he's rounding up Mexican, indigenous people, and Africans from Haiti into concentration camps called detention centers. This plays into a long-standing racial fiction, settler colonial narrative where white colonizer population frame themselves as victims in response to anti-colonial efforts aimed at addressing historic land theft, exploitation, and colonial domination. Here's a clip of Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa, the neo-colonial sellout president of South Africa, discussing this very issue.
These are articles over the last few days. Death of people. Death.
Nobody can
And then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No, there is
Nothing happens to
There
them.
is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people.
Yeah, right. Not surprising to hear that, being said from Trump. And, in a similar note, since October 7, about 50,000 Palestinian people have been killed by the Israeli government. This is not counting those who have been injured, maimed, displaced, or are currently experiencing starvation and malnutrition because of Israel's continued blockade. This is what gets obfuscated and hidden in the wake of the murder of the 2 diplomats of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, May 22. This gets called a hate crime, but the war and carnage imposed on the Palestinian people gets no such label. It's not surprising that the same state that welcomes white settler Afrikaners with open arms is the same one that continues to be in bed with Israel, and Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, who has described the attack on Palestinian people as a war of civilization over barbarism.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a whirlwind. And, with the whole contradiction at Oxford University, centering around the chairman, which we're going to talk about, I have to bring to the people that this institution, the Oxford Union, it was revealed that the academics would drink from a chalice made from an African skull, probably someone related to me, and they've been doing so for decades. And this really explores just the violent colonial history of looted human remains. In Tampa, St. Pete, Florida, we have Tropicana Field, which was built on top of African human remains. So this skull cup, which was fashioned from a sawn off and this polished brain case, it was adorned with like a silver rim. It had a special stand. And they would use it at these senior dinners, these formal dinners. And they did this up until like at least 2015. So we actually raised this, and I'm not sure if forces have the May issue, but it's titled Oxford Union Chickens Out, Joins with U.S. Government to Attack Anti-Colonial Free Speech. And, we actually raised this where in May 29th, they're having this debate arguing, should Africa evict its colonial masters? A question that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has spent his whole entire life solving. So basically, the chairman declined the invitation to the Oxford Union to discuss the debate this time around. And you have to read more about it. Go to theburningspear.com, read the article titled Oxford Chickens Out, or you can just watch the chairman's presentation on our YouTube channel, Burning Spear TV. And, the 2019 Oxford debates, so incredible. It's known as Africa Speaks for Itself, the cry heard around the world, or something like that.
Uhuru. Wow. Anyway, I know we're going to get into it, but what an incredible note to leave off of around the war of civilization over barbarism. And then you talk about Europe drinking from the human remains of African people, like we say, not surprising. But continuing on with the barbarism of the colonizer, Donald Trump is reigniting his tough on crime persona, this time calling for a mandatory death penalty for anyone convicted of killing a police officer. Trump declared that, quote, anyone who murders a cop should get the death penalty, no questions asked. He framed the policy as necessary to restore law and order and protect the heroes who keep us safe, quote unquote. Civil rights advocates point out that policies like this affect African and indigenous communities the most, who already disproportionately face wrongful convictions, racial disparities, and no due process rights. And there's so much, like this and more happening in this country, in the US, and around the world. And that's what this podcast aims to expose and to sum up. And this is why it's a product of the Burning Spear TV. And we bring context and clarity to these world events. And we don't just talk about them, but we give it to what end, right? We say how we're going to get organized. So for those viewing, you're not, we don't want you to just be spectators. You're not just an audience to us. You are the potential organizers, for this free, liberated world that we are, talking about and need to construct. And if these article headlines are any indication that we need a new world, now's the time to participate and to help, get this channel out, and reach 15,000 subscribers. So go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, make sure you're tagging family, friends, and bring this type of discussion, political education to the people. So let's go ahead and take a moment to sit with these headlines. Let's talk about this stuff. We have a theme here. Yes. Comrade Rep Janova taking the mic.
I just gotta say, I don't care what Donald Trump, his tough on crime persona is. It's too late. We already had the trial of the century. The Uhuru 3 kicked the U.S. government's ass, which emboldened the Rodney Hintons to say, I don't care what kind of law, the law, as chairman teaches us, is just the opinion of the ruling class. We don't care. It used to be illegal for me to run away. And guess what? I would have did it 100 times over. Okay. They said, oh, we're going to cut off a leg. Yeah, I'd have been hobbling over there. I'd have been hobbling to freedom. Okay. That's how I roll. So I don't care what tough on crime persona. That's a reaction because he's Trump, and the white ruling class saw how Rodney's actions inspired the African working class. They don't want more of that. They don't want more of the Haitian Revolution, but it's too late. Kupate Pulakai, that's what I say.
Yeah. I mean, and going into prison after striking out against the colonizer typically does mean the death penalty, whether or not you're actually being lethally injected, however they do it. The fact is that we're sentenced to life, in prison and without the chance of parole and all these kind of things. So we're there to lament in prison for the rest of our lives. So it's like when an African makes the choice to strike out against the colonizer, I think by that point, they're not even concerned about life or death. They are taking this charge. And I think what you said, Comrade Janaba, about it being reaction is very important. Trump is speaking to a particular group, the people who aligned with him, to get him elected and things like that. So he's moving, in this fashion. And, I don't expect when we watch videos and things like that of Trump to be the most eloquent, intelligent person in the room. But I just think that's important. He's speaking to a particular type of base that would have unity with, because that's what this country was built on, right? We talk about, you talking about the death penalty for killing the slave master. I mean, what was that? That was lynching, that was the burning of African people in this country. And no colonizers ever paid a price. Lynching was a national pastime in the US. Nobody's ever paid a price, and it wasn't just Trump in office, carrying that out. It was regular, ordinary white people. It was a Republican. It was a Democrat. I don't know what political party they affiliated themselves with when they went out, on their Sunday outings and brought their children, to.
And he's talking about a death penalty as if that scares him. His son died. He's dead. And Africans died many deaths under colonialism. You see us walking around here, you tell what level of death we'd have suffered just based on the conditions we're living in. So we're not scared of that. Sorry, his son's gone. He ain't got nothing else to live. colonialism pushed us to the point. Ain't nothing to do but fight the revolution.
Right. Just how you said, it's pushed us to a point to where it's beyond that fear. It's beyond that, it's at a need now. So our people we're moving in a different way. So, just how you said, you can say whatever you want to say. We're going to do what we need to do.
Yeah. And that's get organized. That's get organized under the leadership, of a revolutionary party like the African People's Socialist Party. Because, it's really important to take, all of this energy and, and the absolute and justified resentment of the colonizer and their system and organize it toward advancing the African Revolution. Comrade Soliana, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're good. I really like what everyone said, and I appreciate Rep. Janaba for bringing up, what Chairman Omai teaches us about how law is the opinion of the ruling class. And if you, think about that, then crime is also the opinion of the ruling class, right? And what gets deemed a crime are things that or actions that, challenges the colonial status quo, right? So every time that Africans rise up and or do anything really that challenges the status quo, that is what's a crime, right? And so lynchings won't be a crime, right? The attacks on African people won't be a crime. And I just think that's like an important idea to understand. And, Trump is just, Trump is being basically upfront, like you said, Director Key, like upfront with what, sort of Democrats have also been doing just quietly. A lot of the things that we're seeing, whether it be, the attack on anti-colonial free speech or the, the blatant message that welcoming white South Afrikaners, to the US says, like, that is just the sort of 2025 iteration or like the sort of bold relief version of the colonial attacks that African people have been facing. Like the party is not shocked that these things are happening. The party has been calling out the system since its inception, right? Even, this idea of like how fascism is now here. Even George Jackson in the 70s said fascism has been here. Like this is not new at all. And so, people talk about fascism when it's something that now, white people are also gonna, face the brunt of. That now it's the real problem when it's, when the things that African people have been facing, since that's normal when, North Americans and other groups experience it, now it's the thing that needs to get termed fascism, and that's the thing that we need to organize under. But no, it's colonialism. Colonialism has been has defined our experiences since our, since the attack on Africa and us being forcibly brought here. That has defined African people's existence, right? And that's what we're fighting against. And so again, like seeing Trump and sort of seeing this iteration is just, again, like Director Keeley, you said, should, continue to light that fire under our ass, but we need to put that, concentrate that, temper that into revolutionary organization and get together, kind of like what we're seeing with what's happening in St. Louis, right? This community doesn't come out of nowhere. That is, that is African people understanding that power ultimately lies within us and our capabilities, and the state's always going to try to take that capability, that capacity to protect ourselves away, and that's what we're fighting to protect, right?
And it makes me think about Thomas Sankara, where they say a soldier without any political or ideological training is a potential criminal. So I just it made me think about that and the importance of joining a party, so we don't have Rodney Hintons doing things all on their own. It's organized.
Yeah. And I want to go back to something you said, Comrade Soliana, about going to the Palestine issue and the quote unquote white genocide in occupied Tanzania or South Africa. And we call it South Africa, even though it's occupied Tanzania. So we're dealing with the contradiction, even as we say the name of the land. And you made a statement about how what's happening to Palestinians is not characterized as genocide, by the colonizer, by the colonial bourgeoisie. They're not defining what's happening to Palestinians as genocide. And it's, interesting that every time something is happening to white people, we can characterize it as genocide. I mean, in the first instance that we see genocide is, when it's declared after, the Holocaust in Europe. What happened to, European Jews in Germany. Now there's genocide. But what about all of the indigenous people that have been nearly decimated on their own land? and of course, millions of Africans that have been stolen from Africa, dispersed around the world, and the colonial atrocities, and what gets developed in the colonial policy to ensure that African people, that genocide is carried out on a regular basis against African people right here in this country. And sometimes the colonizer can't even grasp that what Africans are experiencing right here in the U.S. is a genocide. And they need to see like pictures of blown up babies and things, and then that's how they wrap their brains around it. But the fact is, like, right here in the US, African women and babies are, the infant mortality rate is skyrocketing, for Africans, and there's no end in sight. It continues to increase. And, so that's genocide. And you have the whole issue of mass incarceration of African people locked down in these prisons. That is genocide, as well as, the murder of Africans by the police, by regular white vigilantes, so on and so forth. So there was no word, no term, what was it, before 1942? To describe what had happened to African indigenous people and the peoples around the world had been assaulted by the colonizer. And so that's what we're, seeing here, as well. And I just think when we've talked about on the show, the chairman's concept of an uneasy equilibrium, and we've, spoken about just the need for the colonizer to really recognize and get under the leadership of the African working class and the African Revolution, that's the only future for the colonizer as well. Because you can't be in South Africa, own 80% of the land, push all the Africans into these townships, these shanty towns, living literally, under 10 roofs. And we have comrades right there representing the African People's Socialist Party who organize under these conditions. And so you see it, firsthand. This is the reality for our people in Africa. And then white people living high off the hog in Africa. And, so you have a situation where the people right there, colonized, dominated, and experiencing this kind of oppression, exploitation, of course, they're going to fight for their land, their resources. And that's exactly what's happening in Palestine. So there might be a couple of settler colonizers who identify as Israeli, who catch it because they're sitting on this pedestal, and they think they can maintain this position on top of the rest of us. And the same goes for police inside the US who work to maintain the social system, and then sometimes they don't get to come home to their families because they've made sure that a young Rodney Hinton son didn't get to make it home to his. So this is the uneasy equilibrium that we a part of it, what we're talking about, and why it's necessary for the colonizer to really understand this themselves. If they want to see a future for themselves, they have to come under the leadership of the African working class. So yeah, comrades, I think we got about maybe one more minute for this section, and then we switch over to the primary objective. So are there any closing remarks for this for the world weekly, the whirlwind, garbage?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it just, I think about the indigenous land that we're on right now, and how just they never get discussed in the white, community. That's why we say that this is Palestine. We got Palestine right here in the African community. And it's something that we really have to address, especially in terms of African identity, because Africans need to understand that question. You do have a lot of Africans, maybe they're Pan-African, whatever, they've got going on. Sometimes you'll hear things that, just don't address that question. And how can you stand with Palestine and you don't stand with the indigenous people as you're standing on their land, So I think that's something that I wanted to make that connection.
Yeah. Chairman says Palestine's right here. Because a lot of the white leftists, they ain't flying to Palestine. They not going there.
But I mean, even just the question of very fine farmers, and I think it's kind of humorous to think about the very fine farmers and the fact that they're trying to kick out the indigenous people, who, we had the whole dust storms. We already discussed the dust storms and stuff at ALD. These are going to be the worst farmers you've never seen. We ain't going to grow not a dang thing. So, I'd love to see white folks working. That would be awesome. But I doubt that there's any meaningful thing. This is a political statement that's being made. Nothing more.
Right. Exactly. Uhuru, comrades. All right. Well, that was really, I think, just really insightful. Thank you, comrades, for summing up, these some of the latest news headlines and giving it the African Internationalist perspective that it so desperately needs. And now we're going to get into our primary objective for the show. We mentioned at the start that the primary objective of today's episode is to bring awareness and get everyone who is watching right now involved in the emergency recovery and relief response happening in Northside St. Louis, led by the African People's Socialist Party, the Black Power Blueprint, and Project Black Ankh. And we're going to right now play this very short video that shows just a fraction. I don't want people to think this is the full picture of the damages and of this tornado that hit Northside St. Louis, and also a glimpse of the response that has seen the Uhuru Movement. So let's go ahead and roll that right now.
Massive trees, not just small trees. Whole tops of buildings were destroyed in our community. So, as I said, this is something that happened in the African community. The attempt is going to be made to characterize what has happened as something that was simply an act of nature. And of course, we can say that the tornado was something that was provided by nature, but the devastation that impacted the African community was not all due to nature. Much of it as a consequence of the political decisions that were made by the government, that were made by particular politicians, black and white, who serve a colonial government at the expense of the African community.
And we just got together and just started putting everything out on social media to see if people could come and help. We have about 7 properties on this Western corridor. We have the basketball court that's being built from scratch. Was $160,000. We got the bakery down a little farther on John that we're trying to open up now. We was in a battle with the city for 10 months just to get a permit to bring fresh food and baked food into this community. Yeah. So we finally got the permit. The contractors are working now, and then the hurricane hit. So we're just trying to really just clean up everything in one area where we could, hopefully the city will bring dumpsters and we can, and pick everything up. So we just really, really appreciate everybody to come out. And this is gonna be a real corridor once we get going. Karen across the street, she has a healthcare business. She purchased this building here and she's fixing it up. She want to put a cigar lounge in there and some other things in there. Other people are starting to fix up their community now that they see that it can be savable. So we're, like, our blueprint is part of that. So we just really want to, just get everything out of in one pile or 2 or 3 piles where the city can come in and pick it up. So we're just really happy that you guys can come out and help us facilitate that.
Yeah, they talk about $1 billion for St. Louis because of the tornado. But what they don't say is that $1 billion need to come to an African community that bore the brunt. I went to South St. Louis on the very day this tornado came through and was talking to some white people, and these are activists, which presupposes a certain kind of progressivism on their part, people who keep up what's going on. And they're telling me events they were doing. They asked me what happened. I'm telling them how North St. Louis has been devastated, and they were shocked. They had no idea that it was going on. So in the same city, if people don't know what the hell is going on, I know you don't know in the various places that you're located, despite the fact they may show something bad happen in St. Louis. They don't show that it's concentrated. It's a concentrated destruction based on policies that the death of which based on political determination, political decisions made by a colonial administration.
All right, there we go.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm so glad you replayed that, because we definitely needed to hear that audio, just Chairman summing up like what was happening, the context of the neglect that North St. Louis has been facing, and how the storm has just, made that worse, right? Exacerbated the sort of or really exposed just how the conditions that African people were living in, and how the party has continued to step in and continues to do so, and how the community is just rallying around. And hearing DC Ona speak to the to the people is always really invigorating and amazing. So yeah, and so just to also look at some of the facts from the tornado aftermath, and about the city's role in creating this disaster for our people. We have some stats here. As of May 22nd, 7 victims have officially been identified. They are Larry Patrick, who's 82, Catherine Brown, Jerome Robinson, Rena Scott Lyles, who was 60, who was running toward the basement with her husband, Alan, when their Fountain Park home collapsed, a family member reported. We have Dolores Holmes, who's 70, mother of 5 and great-grandmother to 8, who died when her home in the Ville neighborhood collapsed. Patricia Pendleton, 74, a volunteer at Centennial Christian Church in Fountain Park, who was trapped when the bell tower collapsed. And Juan Baltazar, who was 48, who was the owner of a Mexican street corn food truck, who was killed by a tree that fell in Carondelet Park. This is a full-scale catastrophe with many residents in need of food, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and just so much more. And but many more will need places to live, as buildings are continuing to get condemned, and these places that are getting condemned are where African people are living, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the city of St. Louis is really using this tragedy as a way to continue the colonial exploitation and the gentrification of the African community there. I mean, in the aftermath of this devastating tornado, some of the hardest hit families are now being told that they got 10 days to leave their homes. The same thing happened after the hurricanes here, because, a lot of times what happens is, instead of taking on the responsibility of repairing, they will just evict the tenants. And they give them, 10 days is sometimes, it's sometimes shorter than that. But the residents are, they're confused, they're overwhelmed, literally left in the dark. So, where are they going to go? And, I say to the Uhuru House, go to the Aquava Hall. But it's reported that about 28% of the 8,000 homeowners north of the Del Mar Boulevard, or the Del Mar Divide as it's called, are likely uninsured. And some areas are seeing insurance rates as high as 80%. And this is the same area that was hit the hardest. So you got red stickers popping up on homes across the area. They're marking the properties as unsafe and giving residents like 10 days to leave before they're condemned. And they don't even enter the homes when they mark the property. It's just clear set. And it's up for a land grab by the city. So, it's wild. Colonialism at work.
Yeah.
Which is the city's response, of course, right after that tornado is police containment. Mm-hmm. And they imposed a curfew actually on the African community and set up that police command center right there in the middle of the neighborhood, grocery store, Africans are reporting that they are actually being threatened by the police if they refuse to vacate their homes, their own homes. And the city called on who? The people, to drop off debris at designated centers and to donate to their recovery efforts. Efforts that have not made their way to where? The North Side. And the city is also flush with cash, which those fools even bragged about at one point.
Yes. And it's so insulting. I mean, that they expect the people to foot the bill of the damage and do the work that the city is paid to do. Your taxes, utility bills, all of these things. That's what our resources go to every single month. And they're telling the people, come drop off big old loads, big old trees, big old roof debris at our designated locations. Donate to our relief efforts. And again, we know that these resources, the donations and things are not coming to the North Side. So, and just to look at what the city of St. Louis is looking at in terms of resources, $800 million, including the ARPA money, which was worth $498 million, the American Rescue Plan Act. They also had a settlement with the NFL Rams team who left St. Louis and are now the LA Rams. Well, the damages that the city suffered, they came to a settlement worth $290 million, and then interest on that settlement worth $30 million plus. And then a surplus from last year's budget of $42 million. So they can free up the interest and the surplus at minimum to and get that out into the community. The chairman said, upwards of something like more than $1 billion needed, for the damages. And a few weeks before the tornado, the head of the city's emergency department had warned city leaders that the department needed help. And this is something that, I'm familiar with as somebody who's, run for city council here in the city of St. Pete, and just analyzing, city budgets and where they spend these resources, right? Where they spend your money. And most oftentimes, like, you see like a huge section of the budget is going to the police. And then some more flowery language that basically just says money is being poured into like the downtown metropolitan areas where the white people are for beautification and things like that. And it's just so in contrast with the areas that need the money the most in the city to be able to build the necessary infrastructure to prevent such devastation when these nature occurrences happen. Living in St. Petersburg, Florida, and, dealing with the hurricanes, and just, you get a bad storm, you got millions of gallons of sewage in the bay, with just a bad storm, so this is because they don't put the money where it's necessary in building the infrastructure here to withstand that. So anyway, so a few weeks before the tornado hit, this is what the city's emergency management department is saying: we don't have enough money. And if you look at a Washington University study, it showed that cities like Chicago and Kansas City spend something like 1.5 to 2% of their public safety budgets on emergency management, which would be dealing with, something like this, the tornado. And so in St. Louis, the department receives just $451,000. That's 0.2% of the whole budget that goes to this apparatus. So that's more than 7 times less than some comparable cities.
Yeah, these stats are just, devastating, but not, surprising, right? And Chairman, when he went live summing up, and we saw a portion of it when you played the video, he talks about how, the city in the wake of this, did give out food and did, hold these, tables for, people to pick up their resources. And, Chairman makes the point that, the city doesn't want the people to starve, but he wants African people to be dependent on the city, right? So, the storm comes through. Our communities are ravaged because the city never gave a damn about the areas to begin with. And so when this happens, now African people are, instead of relying on their own resources, which they do not have because of this lack of infrastructure and neglect, are now, having to go to the state. And so, Chairman makes the point that it's our capacity to provide for ourselves that's being robbed, and what we see is getting exposed through this process, right? And so I just wanted to mention that. And it's also been reported that the tornado has caused a whopping 1.6 billion, that's with a B, and $1 billion in damages, and that money needs to go to the African community. But again, of course, it won't. And the current mayor, Kara Spencer, has been pushing for the RAM settlement money that Akili just mentioned to be given to business leaders for property development, when it should have been going to the Black community in the first place. And so it's important that we, highlight the conditions of North St. Louis before the tornado, right? Decades of city-initiated assaults on the African community has left the North Side replete with vacant, crumbling buildings, nowhere to access fresh, healthy foods. This is what people call food deserts, abandoned schools, no recreational facilities for the children. And, the people have already been living with the aftermath of a tornado by a different name. And this is what we say, colonialism.
Colonialism, that's right. Because it's nothing natural about this disaster, as they would like to paint it. It's the tornado, but it's the colonial, it's the whirlwind. And now that's what Marcus Garvey was talking about. And they'll say like, oh, there's really not much that you could really do to ward off the threat of extreme weather. But that's a lie. Like, how else do you explain how the South Side, the white community of St. Louis, was able to resume business as usual, just a normal day after the tornado? Because resources are regularly poured into the South Side, St. Louis. That strengthens the infrastructure. That lets the buildings to be able to withstand those high winds from a tornado or something. But the north side of St. Louis is left to rot. And that also, that there's the question, it's no coincidence behind the difference between the effects of the tornado for the African community and the white community. It's not, this is orchestrated colonial violence against the African community, and there's no other way to explain it.
Yeah, it's the same situation as Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, actually. And y'all, I remember Hurricane Katrina like it was yesterday. My family, like many others, we were scattered across the Gulf Coast, from New Orleans to all over South Mississippi even. And when the storm hit, it just didn't bring wind and water. It brought destruction. And when I tell you, it brought destruction, displacement, and just a silence really from our government that spoke louder than any storms or any of those winds really. And our people's homes, they were flooded, the roofs were ripped off, memories they completely washed away. And what was worse than that wind was that what came after. And when I say what came after, that really is actually what didn't come after. Aid didn't arrive. Help never came, never showed. In our neighborhoods, in the Black communities that had been there for generations, I'm telling you, generations, we were left to fend for ourselves. And we waited on rooftops, you've seen it. We cried in the shelters, held our elders as they realized their homes, they were gone. And not just gone, y'all, actually taken. Because once our people were pushed out, here they came.
Yeah.
The colonial developers and investors and, all that. And they scooped up that land, and our grandfathers had sowed, and that front porches of those homes that our grandmothers had swept and cleaned every morning. They built condos and coffee shops and, all that, where our corner stores used to stand and our community centers were. And that's where we thrive. And that land, that culture, that was ours. And now, y'all, I tell you, it's barely recognizable. And it wasn't just New Orleans. Look at the Lower Ninth Ward, look at the Tremaine, look at Gentilly, even all over the Gulf Coast. Like I said, towns like Bay St. Louis, Pasquistan, Biloxi. We saw that same story in Flint. We saw it in Detroit. In Brooklyn even. It's a pattern. When disaster hits, Black folks suffer. And when the dust settles, I mean, we're erased. And we're replaced by a vision that was never really meant for us to be a part of that outside of labor.
Right.
And now we see that's happening again. You know, in St. Louis just got hit by this devastating tornadoes, and whole neighborhoods and African communities are destroyed. And the roofs torn off, trees crushing the homes, gardens uprooted, I tell you. And yet, once again, no aid, no major headlines, no national news, no trucks lining the streets with supplies, and just complete silence. But make no mistake and be no fool, because investors, they're already circling, and they see that opportunity in our pain. And just like Katrina, y'all, just any other African community before, this isn't just about weather. It's not about a disaster. It's about that system. And it's a system that's been displacing, ignoring, and erasing African people in America over and over again. We know it. And if we don't speak out and do something about it, it's just going to keep happening. So we remember Katrina not just as a storm, but it's really a warning. And we look at St. Louis today, and with those clear eyes, and because history, it's repeating itself. And the question is, what are we going to do? And will we let it? And the city of St. Louis is leaving the people, they're leaving them out to die. And the only force standing between them and success is the Uhuru Movement. And since the police murder of Mike Brown and Ferguson way back in 2014, the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru Movement, has been providing political leadership, summing up the main contradictions facing our people as colonialism. We have been organizing in St. Louis to build an anti-colonial movement, developing institutions, community programs that are actively transforming decades worth of city-caused destruction on our community. The Black Power Blueprint and the African People's Education and Defense Fund have established a community garden, a flea market, workforce housing, community centers known as the Uhuru House, a state-of-the-art basketball court, and we're opening up a cafe. I mean, just we got it going on. And working on that development of African women's health centers and affordable housing to reverse that effect of what? Gentrification. So all of this has been established in only just a few short years, putting the city government to absolute shame, y'all.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much, Mariah. And just for bringing that comparison, firsthand account of Katrina to this tornado. And, you know, it's only natural that following this tornado that the Uhuru Movement and the community at large did not and could not wait for the city to respond. Like you said, there's this history there. And we're not letting it repeat itself because we weren't waiting around for somebody else to do it. We haven't been waiting around for the past, 11 years since we've been in St. Louis after the murder of Mike Brown. We're not waiting around now. And in fact, you know, Kara Spencer, the mayor of St. Louis, had actually advised citizens that they should not self-deploy to help in cleanup and rescue efforts. Well, who was going to do it, Kara? So how many more people would be dead if the people did not intervene? Literally. And we were not waiting around to learn the answer to that question. So the party initiated our response to the Black Power Blueprint and Project Black Ankh. We've organized volunteer work days to clean up the debris, rebuild structures, drop off locations for water, non-perishables, diapers, and other essentials to get people through the power outage. It has been the only comprehensive strategy to rebuild right there in Northside St. Louis. And the people have been magnificent in this process. Despite the heavy losses and the devastation, the African community is actually celebrating our unity as we come together to solve this crisis. We are experiencing the power of an organized, collective response. Like the chairman said, he hasn't seen this since the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The people came out, and that's exactly what's happening here.
Right, exactly. And just like we showed in the video earlier, you know, our leadership, Chairman Amani Chatella and Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Chatella, you know, whose homes are also in one of the, you know, hardest hit areas. You know, they have they've walked the community to talk to the people and let them know that the kind of work that's happening. And what we're really seeing, what we're witnessing, is the power of self-determination in real time, and it's incredible, right? It's incredible. And there's so much that we can and will say, and we have already. But we want to let you know how you can become a part of this emergency response team. So you can
Right. That's
process as
right.
well.
Reinforcements are on the way. So if you can get into St. Louis, now's the time. I'm looking up flights. Everybody's looking up flights. We're trying to put boots in the ground. If you could take a drive, take a drive. And we got to be a part of the community cleanup crew and take care of ourselves. Donate to the relief fund at blackpowerblueprint.org/Northside disaster fund, because we have to raise a minimum of $25,000 to rebuild. And if you're in St. Louis, if you're in the surrounding areas, if you could drop off essentials, food, water, sanitary items, field first aid equipment, baby food, more, anything, drop it off. 4101 West Florissant Avenue, also known as the Uhuru House, as Comrade Director Keeley said.
Yes.
And support the campaign. Support our campaign defending the city of demanding that the city of St. Louis pay reparations for its crimes against the African community, against the Black community, both presently and historically. Uhuru.
That's right, y'all. Just come on. You got to contact that local media, call into the radio station, newspapers, let them know what's happening in St. Louis. We have to. We can't allow the city and the media to bury this. And speaking of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, we'll be actually hosting a press conference tomorrow, Tuesday, May 27th at 1 p.m. Central at the St. Louis Uhuru House to call out the city and announce further action being taken by the community.
Yes, and that address again is 4101 West Florissant Avenue in St. Louis. So stand with the community at this press conference. And we also, of course, will continue to report on this issue as the campaign to bring power back to North St. Louis continues to grow. And in the meantime, make sure to subscribe to our channels for the press conference live coverage and check us out on theburningspear.com and the Burning Spear on Substack. So I think that we've dealt with, we fleshed out the primary objective. Like we said, this will not be the last time we talk about this, and keep following this campaign. And like I said, come out, support, put boots on the ground right there in St. Louis, or donate right now to the link that you see across your screen, blackpowerblueprint.org/Northside Disaster Fund. And it's been amazing. Another great episode, comrades. And now we go into our wrap up. Comrade Mariah, I hand it to you.
Thank you. Before we wrap up with our announcements, we want to, of course, recognize the powerful team that we have over here that produces One Africa Worldview podcast. And of course, our hosts, Liliana, Jennifer, Kile, along with myself, our researchers and headline writers, our editors, our engineers, our special guests, President. We are accepting new volunteers to join our team, join the war of ideas, and make your voice heard. And sign up over at theburningspear.com/volunteer. And looking ahead, you can join the Youth and Student Working Group at tiny.cc/YSWG. That's tiny.cc/YSWG. And the Youth and Student Working Group is a subcommittee of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations, tasked with the mission of winning the masses of Black youth and Black students onto our own national Black political agenda for self-determination. On Tuesday, May 27th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, join the Report Back from Cuba virtual event hosted by the African National Women's Organization. President Yejide traveled to Cuba on assignment from the African People's Socialist Party as part of the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign. Learn how the Cuban people are defending the gains of revolution governance, first-hand insight, the situation on the ground and impact of the U.S. blockade, and the addition of Cuba to the state sponsor of terror list. And on Wednesday, May 28th at 6:30 p.m. Central, the African People's Solidarity Committee hosts a local event titled "The Devastation Didn't Start with the Tornado." This event calls on white people to stand in solidarity with Black self-determination and reparations. This event takes place in person at the Uhuru Solidarity Center at 2654 Gravois Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, and online at the same time. And you can register over at apscuyuhuru.org/register. That's apscuyuhuru.org/register. And that's it for what's coming this week. And don't forget, you can go over to theburningspear.com/events. That's theburningspear.com/events to check out everything that's going on.
Yes. So thank you so much again for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join us again on One Africa Worldview next week at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on the Burning Spear TV YouTube and Burning Spear Media Rumble channels. Until next time, comrades, One Africa,
One
Nation. Uhuru.
Mhm.